Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, wherever you are. You have joined DISTILL, a 360-degree view of life in sports. My name is Wendy Rosenthal, and I am joined by my wonderful, esteemed, fantastic, and always smiling, although bundled up partner, Eira Switzer, because, oh my God, it's like 50 degrees here in Los Angeles today. Freezing. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Besides freezing.
Yeah.
By the way,
I'm warm now.
We're in a studio that's like 550 degrees.
Thank
so,
goodness.
You know, it's...
I'll be able to continue.
Exactly. We are so happy to be here with you again this week, and we're very excited to bring a wonderful guest to the table who we're going to introduce in a moment. But as we always do, we kick off the show by reminding you that we are the owners of the Distillery Inc., a consulting firm that works with athletes to help them repurpose their athletic intelligence so that they can have meaningful, fantastic, fulfilling careers beyond sports. And because of that and our deep, deep love of all sports all over the world, we are here talking with you about all the things around sports, not necessarily what's on the field, but what's kind of behind the scenes.
Right.
And we are here at the UBN Go Network in, well, I won't say beautiful downtown Burbank because we're not, kind of near sort of Burbank area.
Right. Yeah.
And we want to welcome our faithful and loyal and wonderful engineer, Ryan. Welcome
Happy
today.
to be here. Hello, hello, hello.
We always like to hear from you, so you can, if you have
that.
any questions for us today as we talk to our esteemed guest, or any comments that you would like to share with us, you can always do it on our Facebook page, or you can call in at, and I'm going to say this because our guest is from the UK, +1 for those of you over there who might want to talk to Tony, +1 323 524 2599. Before we get started, we always like to spend a couple of minutes talking about something that's going on in sports, and I think we're going to use this as an entree to introduce our guest as well.
Yeah.
First of all, we want to bring him on early because it's very relevant. We are very, very fortunate to have Tony Husband with us today, all the way from the UK. He is a BBC sports commentator, personality, all-around fantastic guy, and who we had the opportunity to meet when we were in London for the Seattle Seahawks-Oakland Raiders game. We had a chance to interview him then. We played that recording for you a few weeks back, but we couldn't resist to have him on live because he's just so much fun to talk to. Welcome, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Really nice to be with you and to see you again, Wendy, and to meet you, Eira, as well.
Thank you.
A great connection from all across here in the UK and over to the west coast of the United States. So I kind of wish I could have come across to the studio, but we'll make do with a link from Hampshire.
Yes,
Well,
and the next time you are in our neighborhood, please
Anytime.
stop on in.
We'd love to have you here in person.
Oh, well, let's make that a date for a future show.
Okay, and we're coming back, by the way. We're actually, before we get started, we do want to come back for the Major League Baseball game that's supposed to happen over there and to cover that. So maybe we'll see you sooner rather than later.
Right.
We don't have to wait till
That's
football
something
season.
that's on my radar, definitely.
Okay, we'll have to talk. So normally, Tony, we kick off the show with kind of, like I said, talking a little bit about what's going on in sports. And so two things we want to bring up that are kind of current events, and then we will talk to you more about other topics. But one thing is, and I promised last week when we were on that would be my last talk about football,
And
American
you
football.
knew that was a promise you just couldn't keep.
I know. Aaron knows me too well. American football is my favorite sport, although I love every sport. But we were curious because there was a lot of commentary after the Super Bowl here, and we even talked about it last week on the show about how people were very disappointed that it was a bad game, it was a boring game, and
bad or boring defined by the fact that it was a low-scoring game.
exactly, like there was no offense, but we were of the opinion that it was one of the most amazing defensive showcases ever in the history of football.
Yeah.
So we were kind of aghast that that people were so upset and disappointed in the outcome. How was it perceived over in the UK? What was the comments in the press about it?
Well, I think you have to set the Super Bowl context in the UK always against the fact that the game doesn't kick off until 11:30 at night.
Right.
And it doesn't finish because of the long halftime show till sometimes gone 3 a.m. I think this one was maybe 3:15, something like that. So you have to remember, we finished the game. Those that stay up and watch it are watching it with pretty bleary eyes by the end.
Sure.
Now, I personally had no problem with the game at all. I enjoyed the game. I thought it was a fantastic defensive battle. In all honesty, I don't know what happened, but over 2 weeks of January, I found myself falling in love with the New England Patriots.
You cannot say that. No.
You must take that back.
Take it back.
It's just they put together such a run.
Yeah, they did.
The way they dismantled San
absolutely.
Diego, the way they won in Kansas City.
Sure.
I just found myself actually wanting them in the end to win the Super Bowl.
La 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 la. I can't hear that.
That's very painful, but we will let you continue on.
Don't forget, both Eira and I were born and raised in LA.
Yes.
Well, with apologies to Rams fans, obviously. If anything, the one thing that got the most attention actually certainly the build up to the Super Bowl over here as well was the kind of blown call in the championship game.
Sure. Well, that was all the talk here.
Yeah, we had a whole show about that. Oh, so I'd love to hear your opinion before we tell you what ours was. What did you think
about the blown call?
Well, on the blown call?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thought, it's clearly a mistake, clearly a blown call. They couldn't review it. I thought in sports over here that we cover, we have we're slowly introducing video evidence into soccer, and we're having quite a few teething problems with just the way it's communicated to the fan base, how people are understanding it. It's not necessarily wrong, but incidents like this one. We can actually see the zebra in the background there. They just didn't see it. Yeah. Now, the point is, I still have a belief that sometimes it's part of sports that mistakes happen.
Absolutely.
It's why we're sitting here talking now. If you rule out every single mistake, then you're going to make sport a very boring kind of subject. And and it is a terrible mistake. And it's a mistake that New Orleans people will talk about for the next 100 years, probably.
Yeah.
But that's sports, and I kind of tweeted that out at one point in January, and quite a few people kind of came back to me and said, I can see your point. We just sometimes, because I think the context I was looking at it from as well was, they were talking about, right, we have to change the rules because we can't have that happening again. But do you change the rules? You have to change the rules every time a human mistake is made. Sometimes mistakes happen.
Sure. And even with advanced technology does fail, and it's never going to be a fail-proof system. Right. Nor do we want it to be, because it's, again, a sport, and inherently, fallibility has to be inherently included as to...
Exactly. And the other thing that we also commented on, in particular for that game, was that it wasn't like the call was blown and then the Rams won the game and there was no opportunity for the Saints to actually come back. They tied the game and they had a whole overtime where they could have, and they got the coin toss, so they could have, immediately been game over. So it wasn't even like it was left with this horrible feeling like, oh, they didn't even have a chance. They did have a chance, in the overtime. So,
and just as importantly, there was an entire game.
They were robbed. The Saints were robbed, and I'm sorry to say that to two people sitting in LA and any LA Rams fans. The Saints were robbed. But that's how history remembers it.
Exactly.
Then, do we have to change all the laws and the rules of the game because of one really bad mistake? I just think that's not the way I would, like to go.
Sure.
But, it was a bad mistake.
We agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next thing that we wanted to bring up was the news today that both Eira and I completely jumped on, which was that the Paris 2024 Olympic Committee has put forth their proposed new sports to be premiered in Paris at the Summer Olympics. And, there's 3 of them that I think even Tokyo is already proposing they're going to be, 1 or 2 of them are going to be in Tokyo next year. But the one that was most exciting was competitive breakdancing.
Yeah.
What's your take on competitive breakdancing being an Olympic sport then?
I see it.
See it? I'm on the fence because I appreciate the athleticism that it takes, to be a breakdancer, first of all. Second of all, I see, there are other sports that you could compare to it in a way, even, ice dancing or figure skating, where it's, it's an artistic expression as well as a an athletic move, you know, with the jumps and all of that.
Right.
But it's kind of funny. Like, you just don't think of the Olympics as a place where you're going to have breakdancers.
Right.
On a competitive worldwide level. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's kind of funny.
We chatted with Tony just for a few minutes before the show started, and he hit it, I think, you know, hit the nail on the head with it's reflective of the times. I mean, we are seeing, you know, people love breakdancing, and, you know, parkour is on the table now, you know, for some people. This is what this generation today is, you know, focusing on and enjoying, and, you know, why not? You know, why not breakdancing when we've got curling? What's exciting about curling for so many people, really? What's, you know... Now, I feel badly for the folks who've been trying to get in there for ages now, squash. And squash, for whatever reason, just doesn't seem to get final approval. But breakdancing, you know,
the one we always use over here in the UK, and again, you know, we've actually done quite a lot of reporting with them. They're fantastic athletes, great performers, and what they do is sensational. But traditionally, the UK audience, I think a lot of the UK audience has always rather kind of looked at synchronized swimming. And said, you know, really?
Yeah.
You know, and yet now, but I think we have to see it through the eyes of a fast changing world. And dance, I think, particularly in a time where certainly over here, and you know, I know certainly in the States as well, you know, we are all being encouraged. It's about exercise, it's about enjoyment and staying fit, and it's not about the traditional ways. You know, once we were just all sent out to play football or cricket in the UK, or you know, rugby or hockey. You know, it's now about, you know, there are so many different ways to be fit and healthy, and dance is growing, in so many genres of dance are growing as well. And I'm not entirely surprised to see it coming in. Is it a demonstration sport in Paris, or will it actually be a full participating sport? Because often they bring these in as demonstration sports and try them out, don't they?
From what I read, it was a full participation. Like maybe demoing it. I don't know. The articles I read from the Telegraph today, you read it from BBC News.
Exactly.
I think it was a full sport.
Yeah.
No, it's a great point. I asked this question kind of in a joking way, sort of, but is it a gateway sport to esports in the Olympics and say, you know, what, 2032, you know, like when could you make an argument that esports is...
Oh, people are making an argument
already
about that. Absolutely. I mean, when you are engaged, fully engaged, your heart rate is up, you've broken a sweat. There's, you know, a mindset that has to be developed, fine-tuned. You are zoned in.
Thumb exercises.
You know, exercises. People are already making the case for esports. Yeah.
To be in the Olympics.
To be in the Olympics, absolutely.
I don't know. It'll be interesting.
I'm not sold on that one just yet, but I get breakdancing.
I don't know. What do you think, Tony? Ryan, you can talk, Ryan.
The esports thing is a really, really interesting thing, and it's a very generational thing as well. I mean, I come from a generation where computer games and playing computer games kind of was born, so I have that side of it. Mm-hmm. But it was, I think, when I grew up, a lot of us grew out of computer games because, and hopefully you liked playing sport more than actually playing it on a computer.
Sure.
But the esports thing is massive now.
Yeah, it really is.
It's another game changer of generations, isn't it? It's a huge industry.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hugely growing industry. We're seeing the esport market explode in the UK.
Is it?
But amongst a very, very specific audience as well.
Sure.
You know, of that kind of 16 to 34 age group. It's the age group who we're being told, you know, not watching their traditional televisions.
Mm-hmm.
They're not sitting down to watch their traditional, you know, in the case of an NFL game, 3 hours of NFL or even 90 minutes of soccer. They want a condensed, more fast-paced product.
Yeah.
It's very, very popular. And, you know, this generation coming through, that, you know, unless they all put down their gaming consoles and change after the age of 34, then which they're not going to do, because this is what this is the world they're growing up in.
Yeah.
We're going to see a massive change. So yeah, esports will be in the Olympics. I have pretty much no doubt. The only question is whether actually one day we just have an esports Olympics, you know, and
do it separate.
It's big enough that they can have their own event.
So two quick things.
I could easily see it going that way.
Sure.
So two quick things, and this is why, like, we wanted to just have a conversation with you, because I think that you as a sports commentator, presenter, esports is something that's going to evolve, as you're saying. We just came from a meeting earlier this morning, actually, where one of the conversations was about the growth of esports in the U.S. and what it's doing to places like Las Vegas. Interestingly, there's a whole conversation now around the betting and how it's becoming like a entertainment. And so, as a sports commentator, do you ever see yourself in a position, maybe like where you'd have to be sent out on an assignment where you have to cover something like esports and understand what that means and have some kind of insight to it, given the rise of how popular it's becoming and how serious people are taking it?
Yeah, I have no doubts that I will cover esports at some point. In what shape or form, I don't know. If it's in that venue there, though, I'd quite happily go there, wherever that is. That just gives you an
I think
idea
that's Madison. Is that Madison Square Garden? Yeah, it's Madison Square Garden. Yeah, where they have, I think, one of the biggest tournaments every year.
Huge.
Yeah, that just tells you, and I think any sports reporter, broadcaster, who is going to, touch wood, have quite a long time left in their career, is going to have to get into the world of esports. And to what extent, who knows? I probably hope that there'll be enough traditional sport for me to occupy most of my time with that. But esports, absolutely, we will. I think reporters will find themselves covering it a lot more. I think it's not a world that we're totally alien to as well. As I said, I think most of the sports reporters around these days have played computer games, as in the older games. But we've seen it change so much in the last 25 years or so now. So we'll do more of it, no doubt.
So how do you approach something like that? I mean, in your career, you've gone from covering different sports, including American football. Now you're primarily on, I'm going to say soccer for those of us plebes here in America that don't understand just saying football. You're covering soccer now. How is from a reporter standpoint, how do you embrace something that's new or that you have to switch to or that you may not be as familiar with? And what's your approach like if you were sent out onto assignment now to cover something like esports?
Well, I think you're always mindful of the audience and making sure that, look, if this is something you don't know that much about, and, in my day-to-day work, I can often find myself covering a sport that I don't know so much about. I was just today putting together a report about a Paralympic shooter, so this is an amazingly talented young lady who through an accident is now in a wheelchair and took up shooting and is hoping to go to the Paralympics. But I think you fall back on there are some things that the old-fashioned things work best for, and that is it's research. Yeah. Whatever you do, if you're going to do it well, then you have to prepare. I mean, I'm a great believer in that mantra of kind of fail to prepare to fail. So you just have to get across, and there we go. I mean, that's a great example of some kind of Paralympic style shooting there. And I saw this young lady, Lisa Chapman, today. Well, last week we ran the piece on our BBC outlet today, and what an inspiring figure she is. But to do that report, I had to know a little bit more about Paralympic shooting. It's not a vast amount when you're doing, in that case, a more of a sports feature. But you just have to get across your subject. Much like I was due to do some horse racing reporting this week, and I didn't actually have to do it in the end because I was actually ill. But I prepared in advance because I'll be honest, I don't know that much about horse racing. And so we have the big Cheltenham Festival over here, kind of a bit like when you have the Kentucky Derby, I suppose. And I don't know that much about horse racing, so you have to prepare and you have to read up and you have to try and get as much knowledge as you can. Often, though, in very short spaces of time. That's the other thing. I mean, with TV kind of news reporting on sport, sometimes you may only have a few minutes. So you've got to look at the 3 or 4 key things. If you're commentating, though, it's a kind of whole world. You turn yourself into a kind of library for days, researching every possible thing you can, just so that you're completely immersed in whatever it is you're going to cover.
Have you ever been in a position where you've had to interview somebody in a sport that you didn't quite know and got out there and was like, they said something that you didn't know how to respond to because you didn't research that particular thing? Like, what's the life of that kind of, on-site, in the moment kind of interview for you?
Well, yeah, I don't know that I've ever found myself in front of someone and not really known anything about their sport. I think what I have found though is I can remember sailing is a sport where I didn't traditionally follow the sport of sailing terribly well, but living where I do in the UK and working in the area that I do, you have to very quickly learn about how important sailing is to the communities around this area and how successful a nation Britain is at sailing in the Olympics and things like that. And of course, we have the America's Cup, which we're very keen to try and win back, which the Americans lost last time out. But in the 2012 Olympics, I did find myself at the sailing, and I had to interview the sailors as they came off the water. Now, not knowing at that time quite so much about some of the intricacies of what the maneuvers and what they might do on the water, how they might react with the wind and things like that. It meant that you just had to stick to your journalistic principles, really, because they'd come in and you'd have the result and you say, well, look, you finished 4th and 5th in your 2 races today. So you had to fall back on the why, where, how,
right.
what principles. That's the only way you really can do it. When you're working for a general media organization as well, that does help. You're not working for the sailing media per se. But there were some days where even the results sheets weren't printed and the sailors would come in. So I can remember a British windsurfer coming in who was chasing the gold medal. And they do like 10 races over 5 days. So this was after maybe day 3. So he'd done 6 races 5 and 6 or something like that. And he came in front of me and I didn't have his results. And so he stands there ready for the interview. And I didn't know how he got on. So I thought, well, what do I do in this situation? I don't know how he got on. So I just decided to be honest with him. I said, I'm really sorry, Nick, but I don't know how you got on out there. So you're going to have to tell me, how did it go? But
on camera or before? On camera or before?
Yeah, it kind of worked. Yeah. I think honesty is always the best policy in a situation.
People like that.
There was
Authenticity.
no point in me trying to pretend I had no idea.
Sure.
But that is probably that's the best example I can think of in that context of that kind of question, where I've actually had a situation where I didn't know a quite key piece of information, and yet I'm being asked to do an interview.
How have you seen sports reporting evolve or change in the time that you've been doing this for a good bit of time now, and you have a lot of experience? And I'm curious, with reporting in general, now that there's so much social media, you were talking about tweeting, how has your role as a reporter changed in your time in sports?
I think that in the last few years, the social media has had a massive impact. The explosion in sports coverage, the amount of platforms there are out there now covering sports. If you think of the Premier League, which is our biggest market, there are so many outlets now covering the Premier League. The one thing, it's very, very difficult, and journalists who write on a national beat, journalists who cover on a local beat, will all tell you it's almost impossible to sit on a story for very long anyway. If it's a story that is likely to be about a major club, a major player, a major manager, it is almost impossible for a reporter to sit on that information for any period of time now. Whereas once, not so long ago, 15 years ago maybe, you probably, if you were well connected enough in a certain area or to a certain club or story, you may just be able to hold your fire and just wait overnight and run something the next morning. If you had a good story the day before, it's very difficult to do that now. Everything is going out. Everything is instant. Everyone is reacting all the time. And the news machines, the sports news machines, are just eating up that information. They want that content all the time. It's competitive, that everybody wants, particularly when it's the big markets. If it's the Premier League, for us over here, if it's rugby union, if it's cricket, if you're covering a major sport, it's very difficult now to sit on any information. And of course, the tools of the job are just always evolve. We talked about Twitter in particular So often now, you're out on the road. You will never be out isolated on the road for hours, just filing and getting ready to file a television report, where you might spend 4 or 5 hours, compiling TV report on the road. You might be pretty much not having to talk to anyone. Now you would be, taking video for Twitter, sending out information. You're always on the go. I mean, you are literally, you have this thing with you all the time.
Sure.
And, that has changed massively in my time. So reporting is a very, very different beast now to what it was when I began. I mean, but I think it's been a really interesting period to be a reporter, because I think when I started, there were still hallmarks of a more old-fashioned way in certain aspects, but it was already changing considerably because the internet had come in, and that was a big game changer for everything as well, particularly for the publishing, the newspapers who suddenly started having to do email editions or internet editions.
Right.
So there's been lots of changes.
Do you find like that loyalty to one outlet has completely gone away? So I don't know. I remember when I first went over to the UK now in the 80s, the BBC was kind of like, that was it. That's where you got your information. And now with all the competition and all the, like you're saying, nobody can sit on anything. Has that maybe lack of loyalty to a certain news outlet had a detrimental effect, or has it made it no different? You're just all competing and it's just kind of like, let's just go whoever gets the story first is fine, because I'm going to get the information. It's got to get out there anyway.
Yeah, I think that it's still, it's hard now, like I said, to sit on any information for any length of time. I think there is still media, there are still preferred outlets. There's no doubt. We still have situations where an outlet will run a story about a certain football club, and you will still look at the journalist involved, and you will use that as a kind of credibility bar, really, and you will say, well, that piece has been done by that person. So do you know what? We can give that a lot of credibility and credence. That they don't print that kind of material unless they are absolutely sure. Trust and faith is an interesting. We're in a very interesting place in the world at the moment with the whole kind of quotes fake news kind of environment. Yeah. And I think at a time like that, I feel very proud to work for an organization like the BBC, which, I think still maintains a very, very high level of trust, both nationally and internationally. And, I think every journalist who works for the BBC has that as, one of the abiding things that is one of your aims is to do your reporting in the name of, a great media organization. But one of many great ones out there, and that we're in competition with. But we're also, I think, hopefully, putting out information that is true, is trusted, and that people will still turn to. But that is a changing world as well, and we just hope that organizations and journalism that will continue to thrive and be trusted from some great platforms.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think you've made a great point, and it just also, about the trusted, outlets, because I think we have the similar thing here. If you hear it through one place, it's going to be probably not so true if you hear it someplace else. But it sparked my thinking about the fact that now athletes themselves are almost like little media outlets, right? You can't scoop a player who's going to come out on Instagram and give some information before he's going to talk to anybody else, because now it's within their whole brand, their whole intellectual property world to do those things. How are you handling that as a reporter? Do you create relationships with certain players so that you have that ability to kind of, utilize that in a positive way to your advantage, or is it just, again, like a free-for-all?
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing, because I was only just looking at something the other day. I think it was, his name escapes me, but it's the guy who has decided to declare for the NFL draft. And he was drafted by the Oakland A's in
Oklahoma.
Baseball, but he's
Kyle Murray. Yeah.
Yeah. And the way he announced he was going to go for the NFL draft, I think was either a Twitter or Instagram kind of post. It was a produced piece of media.
Yep. Right.
and you think only a few years ago this would have been something that would have gone out, via the AFP wires or Reuters or it would have gone out via
the NFL
in the Bay Area or whatever, through the newspapers or something like that. Now, the media we have, the technology that everybody has now, everybody can be a reporter. Everybody can
look at us.
Produce their own content.
Yeah.
Well, look at the way that we're communicating now. I'm sitting here with my iPad, thousands of miles away, and we're doing a broadcast.
Right.
So, and it's just incredible how things are changing on that front. But so we don't get the access to get as close to the players in the major sports anymore. But I think it's a very interesting point that even if we did, and we were right in with the players in a sense, in the more traditional way in which reporters of yesteryear were, even if we did have those kind of reports with them, the clubs themselves would be more resistant to let us, have too close a binding relationship. They also have they are their own media platforms as well now.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
They produce their own content. They want to put the story out. They will put out that they've signed somebody first. Even if everybody knows that they're going to sign a player, they will still do everything first. The signing interview, the pictures of the player signing, the pictures of the player arriving, the pictures of the player having a medical. Yeah. And then because they hold the power in that for that story, it's then they will say, well, we hold the power of when we're going to release it. Fair enough. You guys can write your stories speculating, well, it's believed they're going to sign and all that. But they're the only ones who can actually press the button and say, well, he signed and here's his first interview. Yeah. And, this is the story. So, there are so many dynamics at work now. So we see the clubs do it, but now with the players are in effect their own media service channels themselves.
Well, and eventually I think there is going to be a fight at some point about, between the leagues, the teams, and the players about who actually owns all of that, and I think it'll be I don't know how you feel about that, but I think it's going to be an interesting fight at some point. Some player is going to come out and say, I know I signed on with you, but this is my brand. This is who I am. This is what is going to keep me in earning money. I mean, Eira and I talk to athletes all the time about what they're doing beyond their sport. And one of the things, if you catch them at the right time, you tell them, even if you're a mid-tier player, you're not a superstar, like name any of them in any sport. Right. You need to really control and own yourself as a brand, because that's going to be what pays you beyond your time as an athlete. Sure. So, it's super important. I don't know if you feel the same way or if that's something that's going to happen with, say, particularly
I'm interested
soccer.
in your take from what the players are saying to you, how they, if you're talking about maybe younger players as well. Yeah. Are they at a stage in their career where you would think traditionally, well, it's all about, am I going to get in the team? Am I going to play well? Maybe, am I going to earn a good contract? But are they thinking about their brand right at the beginning as well now? Are they thinking about how they will portray themselves through their own media platform, through their own Twitter, through their Instagram?
It's so interesting. We've done work with the University of Texas, and they actually have a program within their athletic department where there are classes that freshmen coming into the system have to take, and one of them is to learn about social media and how they are representing not only themselves but the University of Texas, and how they have to be very cognizant of what they're tweeting, what they're posting on Instagram. It's a college class that they get graded on. Right. So the answer to your question is yes, but I just think that the challenge is that they grow up with social media now as just part of life, right? And it's a certain part of life they look at as, pictures of me when I was a kid, or, my mom uses it, or, they're not savvy enough to really understand what owning your own intellectual property looks like, and understanding that you're a brand, and understanding that it's important to recognize who you're putting around you in order to help you manage that as well. Yeah. And I don't think I don't think that that's really clicked yet for a lot of people, a lot of athletes, especially before they get into the professional level. But also I think it's interesting that those players who aren't the superstars have their people, right? And they're telling them this is it. But you have so many players in all sports that are, they're making $500,000 to $2 million, maybe $3 million a year. They mostly sit on the bench. They're not, the first team, or they're backups or whatever they are, and they have nice careers, but they don't think about, and because of that, they don't think of themselves as, I need to think about my brand.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's still new, and I think because the leagues and the teams come out and immediately say, well, if you want to play for us, you got to give it all to us. Mm-hmm. They don't, I don't know if you see the same thing over there.
Well, I think we had a big thing over here with, tax and image rights and things like that, which has been a big issue with contracts for some time. I think ultimately the clubs are going to try and make sure that they are never going to miss out on a piece of the pie. I'm sure that would be the case with the NFL, who would want to maintain control in a sport like theirs. That they do not want to see potential revenue streams going out of not going at least through the league,
right?
As opposed to them basically just going straight into the players' pockets, and the whole brand thing is very interesting, though, isn't it? And the whole the players, the ability they'll have, and for the people around them, they'll have their entourages. They will have their own little media teams producing this content for them, and the smarter ones will have a media team probably with looking at a really long-term strategy about where they want to take a player, where they want to, position them. And, it'll be very interesting to see. Of course, we still have the human side, which is the player has still got to go out there on the field and perform, because if he doesn't perform, he or she doesn't perform, then all the branding and all the strategizing and all the Instagrams in the world are not going to help them if they don't get in the team and don't play on TV.
Well, exactly. Or we could argue that it doesn't matter. Yes, I mean, obviously, if they're playing or they have to perform, but at the end of the day, and this is one of the things that I feel like we're seeing in the U.S., is if you're building your brand around the good works that you're doing. Yeah. So nowadays, I'll say specifically in the NFL, you see this being like, it's a big deal. Thank God it's a big deal, because people are doing some really good things. But, for example, winning the Walter Payton Man of the Year award in the NFL is becoming like the thing to do, right? So you could have a player that nobody's ever heard about, but he is going to do a lot of good works and do a lot of branding and social media around it, maybe be a very, like the background player. But if he wins the Walton Payton Man of the Year award, all of a sudden his profile goes up, regardless of how he's playing. It doesn't matter. Right. Do you know what I'm saying?
Because you're building a personality as well. You're building something that's so much more than just you playing on the court or on the field.
Exactly. And, there's companies here in the U.S. that help athletes across all sports build their charitable profile.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Right.
So...
and everything we said, and the one thing I would say about... it still comes down to the performance on the field, to a certain extent, how much they can market themselves. But, if you can think, we've only really had one NFL story in the mainstream media in the UK in the last week, and it's actually been about a player who hasn't played for 2 years. So, and I don't need to tell you who that is.
Right,
so,
yeah. Well, but that's been the story. Yeah. And that's been the story. I mean, it's funny, when I was interviewing you in the UK, we had a little bit of talk about that particular player and how it was being perceived overseas, and that story has not yet gone away.
Right.
And he's raising profile for lots of things. Yeah. And I don't know if Tony, you saw some of I don't know what they broadcast on the pregame. There were hours of pregame show for the Super Bowl. But one of the very prominent, they gave a lot of time to, one of the segments was all about what he did has actually changed the NFL. And it was very interesting because they didn't want to talk about him, but they talked about all of the good things that have come in terms of, the NFL understanding that they need to be more sensitive and the diversity issues, and they had all these, players that are involved in it now. So it was a good, I would say, 5-minute segment, which is a lot given all the other segments they were doing for, the whole 5 hours before. So interestingly, I think it does matter. it does matter if they're playing or they're not, but I think it matters no matter what. If you're an athlete and you are on a team and you are going to get paid, you have to be worried about your intellectual property, who you are as a brand, what you're doing out in the world, and how you're positioning it, no matter what you're doing.
And to see that you have.
Kaepernick will play again?
Oh, yeah. maybe overseas, maybe in the UK.
Yeah, maybe in the. I don't know. I don't. It's funny. Like I wonder if now he even wants to at this point.
Right.
I don't know. I just think. I don't know. I honestly can't. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know either.
Do you know what? I think that if they ever did put a London franchise in, he'd be a very popular first quarterback.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
He'd have a fantastic support here.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are upset that he isn't playing because we talked about this last week as well. Like when you're allowing, players on teams who are abusing people and doing kind of not so nice stuff, and then here's a guy who was standing up for something that was really very important and politically and socially, and he was doing it
in a respectful way.
In a very respectful way. It's like, you make it so that he can't play. It doesn't make sense. So I agree with you, Tony. I think if there's ever a franchise there, he would be very popular.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Americans would like to see him play.
Absolutely.
Even though, we could debate whether it was the right forum, if he did it the right way. I don't think anybody believes his message was bad.
Right.
Core of his message. So I want to ask you also, how do you see sports evolving? So one of the things that we've been talking about, and you mentioned it earlier in our conversation, is the idea of instant replays, making the sport more, and many sports are now taking that on board. We talk a lot about here how sports franchises are trying to accommodate fans more, although are they doing it in the right way? We've talked about, people getting refunded tickets. There's a new company, I don't know if you've heard about this, that launched that, literally you can buy insurance for if you don't get to go see your favorite. If you buy a ticket to see your team play and then the player that you love doesn't play, like you can actually
Zion
get
going down last night.
Yeah.
Fanshore.
Yeah.
I think it's Fanshore.
What are you seeing in the UK and in all of the sports that you're covering or looking at? Like, what's the evolution? What are the hot topics over there in terms of how sport is evolving today?
Two different things. There's the traditional and then there's the modern. I mean, I touched on the video replay stuff for soccer. I think in the next year or so that will become a weekly topic of debate because we will have the video assistant referee in all the Premier League games from next season. We have it in selected cup matches this season, and it still has the capacity to bring kind of big talking point moments. One of the great interesting things for me is that we are in an era where game time is all about trying to reduce game time a little bit. Certainly when they want to get NFL games down, probably below the 3 hour mark. And I think the AAF is doing, kind of 2.5 hours or so.
Did you watch the game, by the
way?
Really quickly, sorry. Did you watch the AAF games yet? Any of them yet?
I don't think you can see it over here, but
you can't.
I've followed it a little bit. I saw that they nearly didn't make it past week 2. But,
I don't think they launched it in a good way, but that's for another conversation. Carry on.
Right.
Sorry.
No, but the VAR, when it first comes into the Premier League next season, I'm sure it's going to extend games to the kind of 100-minute mark at times. It won't happen all the time, but there will be some instances where the games will go up to 100 minutes, which is, considerably longer than 90. If you think the window of when the matches are played, and the English fan base, it gets frustrated quite easily if the decisions are not being communicated properly. And at the moment, that is the big issue, is that the fans in the crowd are not very well aware of what is going on. The television viewer may have a better idea, but there's no communication like you. I would like to see something more like what you have in the NFL, where the referee will turn to the crowd and will say, the previous play is being reviewed, and then explain and justify why the call stands or is changed. At the moment, we have none of that. And so we have supporters wondering what's happening. So the games will be longer. There will be so many talking points while it beds in. I think it will get better. I think they do need to bring it in, but it's also replay sometimes, and super slow-mo replay can sometimes almost distort what really happens when you slow something down to the nth degree. So yeah. I think that's going to be a big talking point. It's something going on all the time. It was talked about in the Champions League this week with the European League that's played midweeks. There was a problem, a 3-minute delay in a game, and it turned out it was due to a technological problem on the side. Yep. There was some technical issue with the monitor, all those kind of things. So that's been talked about a lot, and that's all the modern thing. That's what's going to happen going forward. And then there are things like the more old-fashioned, which is the fans in the stands. It's the atmosphere that English football is really why it grows and has done so well. People from around the world love to see the atmospheres of an English stadium. They're quite different from what they were like 25 years ago or so, but they're still quite passionate places. A lot of that is to do with the traveling fans, the fans who travel to the away games, which I know is not a concept we see that much in the States. But over here, you will get 2,000 or 3,000 away fans out of a 30,000 crowd at a Premier League game, or 3,000 or 4,000 out of a 75,000 crowd potentially sometimes if it's a cup match or something.
Quickly, the interesting part I want to just interject is that they're seeing a lot of, especially in the NFL, you see a lot of fans that are for the other team. Especially we found in LA. Like you go to some of the games here, and it's like half and half. Mm-hmm. So yeah, absolutely. You do see it, but not as often, do you? Right. So it's quite interesting when you see Pittsburgh or Green Bay on the road. There always seems to be a lot of fans. But just the point I was going to make was that the away fans have to deal with the fact that the fixtures are changed often at quite short notice by television. Traveling around the UK, in evenings and midweeks is difficult if you have work the next day. So they've maintained a cap on the price of the away fan ticket. So it's £30, which I don't know what that is in dollars at the moment, but a lot less than it used to be. But maybe about $42, something like that.
Yeah. So that cap is being kept in there because the Premier League know that its product depends on fans being in the ground as much as they've grown it as a TV product around the world. They know they need to see fans, and they need to have a good balance and competitive atmosphere in the stadium. So, that's been quite a big issue this last couple of weeks as well, and that is something that is really in the traditions of the sport, as much as we're talking about the technological changes that are going to come in next season.
There is a lot going on in sports, and I am looking down at the time, and we have 1 minute left, which is making me so. I'm going to ask this, Tony. Would you mind us calling on you again and coming on and having, because I have about 4,000 more questions.
We could discuss VAR alone.
Which we actually would love to on a very specific. Maybe have you on for that.
We'll do it. Yeah, absolutely. No, I can't. But you said it would fly by, but I can't believe it. We're out of time already.
I know. Ryan gave me the 10-minute thing 9 minutes ago, and I was ready for more questions, and I looked down and I went, "Oh my God, we gotta go."
It worked to our advantage because now we have to have you back.
Well, that works out well. And maybe my plan succeeded.
Yes, exactly. Fantastic. So we will be calling on you very soon. And of course, we would love to have you here in the studio, but having you on Zoom actually works very well, and we're very happy.
So anytime, please.
We want to thank everybody who watched us today, and we want to thank Tony again for your time. And please, you can find us on thedistilleryinc.com. On Facebook at The Distillery Inc. On Twitter, we are on Spotify, iTunes, Castbox, Stitcher, Google Play. So please subscribe, share with your friends if you like what we're talking about. And we will see you, I believe, next week. We actually have an extra show we're very excited about. So we will see you back here next Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Have a fantastic week. And Tony, thank you so much again.